Bit of a change.
We came to drop these styles, it's no shock. We rock till the cops come and knock non-stop. We come from cycle cities and blocks.
Welcome back. Hello everyone. Jason, nice to see you again. That was Psycho Rome, and for those of you who don't know, quite an extraordinary album from '97. This was what Be Real did when he wasn't working with Cypress Hill. An extraordinarily dark and sinister album with some kick-ass beats. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, media, yes, I said we'd talk about this, and The Sun claimed that they had won the election in '92. In '97, they switched sides. Labour, The Sun, The Star, those ones were all supporting the Labour Party, whereas the Conservatives had their core group. Now, you'll notice here that I say output, or we could talk about this being downstream. What we're talking about here is what the media is actually saying. And in terms of what the media is saying, there's nothing really different. The only real difference here is that the Sun has changed sides. Other than that, the Star, the Guardian, Independent, you'd expect them to be broadly Labour. These lot, well, obviously you'd expect them to be broadly Conservative. So in that sense, nothing had really changed, apart from the Sun. The question is, why did the Sun change? And what was going on behind the scenes? And this is where it gets really, really, really important. And this is where we saw the big change in '97 in terms of the campaign. And that is the input, the upstream thing. What was Labour doing? Now, remember what I said about back to basics. Back to basics, the Conservative Party just kind of parked the policy out there and left it to the media to decide what it meant. The Labour Party realised that you might not be able to control events, however, you can try to control the way in which they're presented. And so what happened was the New Labour project decided that it had to go on the offensive. They needed to get their retaliation in first. They needed to try to manage the media as far as they could. If you can control the message, then you might be in a position to control the outcome. You can't control events. Events will happen. However, if you can control the way in which those events are portrayed, and critically, if you can put your own interpretation on what those events are, then you're going to be in a much stronger position. And the media was courted assiduously by the New Labour project, particularly the Sun. And the reason why the Sun changed sides was because one of the very first things that Blair did once he took control was he got in the plane and he flew to America, and he basically prostrated himself at the feet of Rupert Murdoch and said, things have changed. We have changed. Labour Party is not what it once was. We have revised our Clause 4. We have adopted all of these conservative policies. We have embraced neoliberalism plus certain key reforms. We are not the party that lost the election in 1992. Please, can you get that across to your readers? And after some hard work, Murdoch decided to give the New Labour project his blessing. But this is part of a huge strategy that we now call spin. That is the idea that, again, I keep coming back to it, you can't control events. How far can you control the way in which those events are portrayed in the media? This is spin. It's about getting your retaliation in first, courting the media, trying to control the message. And they did that extremely well. And we hadn't seen anything like it at the time. And of course, it later became the petard from which, or with which, Blair was ultimately hanged. But that's metaphorically. But the idea was this was a complete departure. You're not going to let the media just get on and present events the way they want to present them. You're going to get your spin on it. And if you can't persuade the media to present the information as you want it to be presented, then you are going to fight tooth and nail to get your point across some other way. And so we have a huge change in the way in which the media is managed by the parties. We have controlled effort, we have centralized control. No one's allowed to speak without it being cleared with Alistair Campbell. No one's allowed to make a policy announcement without it being cleared by Peter Mandelson. We have a very, very tight centralized control in this media, very, very tight centralized control of all aspects of the campaign. And that is all held up with the core figures of New Labour, those being specifically Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Peter Mandelson, Alistair Campbell, and then a few others, including the likes of Jonathan Powell and Sally Morgan, and a few others, intellectual people like Anthony Giddens. You know, there were a lot of people associated with the New Labour project, but if you remember the core four, that'll certainly get you through the A level, and then you can worry about the rest when you go to university. But media, it's about managing the message. You can't control events. Can you control the way in which those events are presented? So if we step back then and we look at the short-term factors that shaped the outcome in 1997, well, on one hand, we had some very, very clear wins for the Labour Party. They won the leadership battle. There was no contest. The campaign was a non-contest. And the media, in terms of the upstream or the management or the spin, well, again, that was a non-contest. Nobody had never seen anything quite like that before. That was a rewriting, if you will, of the rule book. Downstream media output, in terms of what the media was presenting, well, that was pretty much a score draw. The Sun did switch, and there's probably a few votes here and there with that, but it probably wasn't material to the ultimate outcome. Of course, they claimed otherwise. But in terms of media, you had the Sun switching sides, perhaps a few voters going with it, but then you had the core Tory press and you had the core Labour press, and so perhaps not much of a change there. Again, we have to talk about the difference between tribal voting and rational choice, that idea of consumer politics. The vastly expanded middle class went into this election in 1997, just as they had done in 1992, and they said, well, what's in this for me? What's in this for me with my business, with my council, with the council house that I bought, all of those things. The difference was, in 1992, that expanded middle class perceived that they didn't have a choice. In 1997, they did have a choice. They had a choice between a young, thrusting, progressive Labour Party and a Conservative Party that frankly seemed to be on life support. 1992, society was just still settling down after the transformation of the Thatcher years. 1997, society had not materially changed. If Labour wanted to win, it had to change instead. It had to get those middle-class voters, and boy, by heck, did it do so. Labour successfully repositioned itself so that it could pick up those votes that it missed in 1992. Now, you can read. I'm going to let you read that. That's from Blair's conference speech in 1996. So this is just before the election. He's saying, look, we need to change. We need to go out and pick up those people who traditionally would have been voting Labour, the tradesmen, the independent workers, the entrepreneurs, the small independent traders, basically, the plasterers, the painters, I can't remember the electricians. These are the people who traditionally would have voted Labour, but they voted Conservative in 1992. That has to change, said Blair, and that's exactly what they did. So the traditional wisdom is, sorry about all those bings, the traditional wisdom goes along the lines that oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. Well, in this case, that's certainly true, but it's also false. Society hadn't changed since 1992, but the Conservative position had deteriorated. The Conservatives lost that election. That is certainly true. The Conservative government lost the election in 1997, but at the same time, Labour came in and Labour won that election. They got everything absolutely right. And everyone was ready for it. I think the Conservatives had run out of ideas. They were ready for a break. Unfortunately, rather like the Labour Party after 1979, it went spinning off in the wrong direction. It took a long time to re-establish any sort of even keel. And even then, the schism ripped by Europe is still obviously far from resolved. And that's where really we're going to come to next. We're going to look at 2017, and we will see the echoes and the ripples of that election in 1997, 20 years down the line, still making itself felt. But yes, 1992, 1997, we see a dramatic turnaround in all of the factors that went to influence those elections. And yeah, extraordinary times. nicely captured by Psycho Realm, I think. Thanks for your time. I'll be around to answer questions when you can.
One black to fill your life with terror. Think of all the bullet holes embedded in your area. Bullets at the end who get shot. My motherfuckers making.
Sorry, yeah, a bit sweary. I should probably stop that one. Enjoy. Come to me with your questions. Speak to you in 2017.